welcome. My name is Kathy Andrews. I'm the Senior Librarian for Adult Services at the Salinas Public Library. It's my pleasure today to welcome Bonnie Dillabough, who is an author. We want to start with I want to tell you a little bit about what brought Bonnie to our attention. She had reached out via email through the library website to tell us a little bit about her background. We love authors, but we're so short-staffed that it's very difficult for us to coordinate author talks very often. But I was really intrigued by Bonnie's email, both the kind of writing she did, an author being published for the first time when she was an older adult. And in conversation with Bonnie, it was really clear that an author talk would be really fun. So I am not going to go into a lot about her background because I'd rather hear it from her. Bonnie, I wonder if you could talk first a little bit about kind of your pre-publishing background. What things were you doing? What got you ready to really write, and what got you to being a published author today?
Well, Kathy, all good stories start with once upon a time. And so once upon a time, there was a Navy wife with two little girls, and her husband was never home because he was out on ship, and they didn't have a whole lot of money. And so one of the things that she liked to do with her little girls was to go to the library. She had made it a habit, even during her pregnancies, to read to us. She thought, she was under the impression that reading to a baby in the womb would encourage them to be interested in books in the future. And so then as we were little, she would get books, and she didn't have a budget to buy books, so she went to the library to get them. And I remember as a small child looking around in the library with absolute awe at all of the books that were there. And it was almost like entering a cathedral to me. I loved it. I loved the smell of it. I loved the atmosphere of it. And the most delightful thing in the world was to come home and sit down on the front porch with a new, to me, book in my hands and start to turn the pages. Now, when I first started, I couldn't read that. My mother would read it to me. But I was so interested in the written word that I actually taught myself to read. And I was reading at the late part of age 4. And when my mother went in for the interview back then, that's what we did when we went into kindergarten, is there was an interview with the kindergarten teacher. And they were assessing me. The teacher said to my mother, "What have you done? What am I supposed to teach this little girl? What have you done?" And my mother was like, she knew that she'd done something terrible. And I watched this kind of thing go back and forth between my mom and this teacher who was berating her for teaching her little girl to read. And later as an adult, I just shake my head. But at the time, it really imprinted on me that this thing of, oh, you better not let people know you can read. But I was reading voraciously from the beginning. Now, so libraries, as you can see, has played a very key part in my life. Later, I found that I could write and began to write poetry because my favorite author was Dr. Seuss. And so writing in rhyme seemed natural to me. And so I remember when I was 8 years old, I wrote a poem, My Christmas ABCs. It was a 26-line poem, one line for every letter of the alphabet about what Christmas meant to me. And I actually performed that poem for a church party that year at Christmas time. And was very, very encouraged, and I was off and running. That was the thing I was going to do. I was going to write. And I've always loved it. I've always, been entranced by the power of words and how they allow me to see pictures in my head. And remember that we were black and white television, little tiny screens. back in those days. And so television, although okay, interesting, I Love Lucy, you know. So at any rate, point, I guess, being, so I don't take too much longer with this part of my story, is that writing was always interesting and fascinating to me. And reading, of course, goes hand in hand with that. When I was in high school, I was absolutely sure I was going to be the next great American novelist. I was positive of that. Me and my best friend Mary had decided that what we were going to do when we graduated is we were going to move to Greenwich Village, which was the place where all the artists and writers hang out. And we were going to write novels, and that was going to be the thing. And everybody was going to love them. And we were going to sell thousands of copies of books and be very, very popular, and it would be wonderful. But life does happen. I graduated from high school. I went into the military. In the military, I ended up transferring from Southern California, where I grew up, to Washington, D.C., where I met my husband, who at the time, of course, wasn't my husband yet. And he was from upstate New York. I'm from Southern California. It would have never happened in any other universe, but we met, and then we got married. I started having babies. They kicked me out of the military because you couldn't have babies back then and still be in the military. And I became a military wife, like my mother. Only my situation was a lot different. At any rate, so 6 children later and starting to have grandchildren, I realized that there was this dream that kept coming back to me over and over again. Strange dream. Basically, it goes like this. I'm in a house. And in the house, I'm having a housewarming. Now, you know, when either you buy a house or you're given a house or however it is you get a house of your own, the first thing you do is you explore every nook and cranny, right? So that you know exactly where you're going to put this and move that and blah, blah, blah. So during this party, somebody says to me, Bonnie, do you have fill in the blank? And I said, oh, yes, it's in the other room. Now, I'm going down the hallway to get this, whatever it is, and realize that there's a door that I have not seen before. I'm like, where'd that come from? Oh, must be a closet. I didn't notice. I opened it up, and it's not a closet. It's a room the size of Costco. This big, huge warehouse, and in the warehouse are everything. There's a plane hanging from the ceiling, and there's fancy cars, and there's sculptures, and there's art, and there's toys, and a grand piano, and all this. And I'm looking around and going, oh my goodness, what in the world? This isn't possible. This little tiny house, and here's this huge room. I go running out, tell my friends, you've got to come see this. It's amazing. Go back there, and the door is gone. I had that dream over and over again from the time I was about 16 years old until I was 63. And I'd ask people, what do you think this means? It keeps coming back to haunt me. And finally, somebody told me, write it down and maybe it'll stop bothering you. So I did, I wrote it down. In the meantime, I'm doing my job, which at the time was internet marketing, and I was helping a client who helped authors. That's what he did. He's a ghostwriter and he helped authors. And I started watching, I was editing video. And in editing the videos of the interviews that he did with these authors, I started going, you know, I always wanted to write a book. And at one point, I got the opportunity to interview Mercedes Lackey as part of this program. Now, those of you who don't know Mercedes Lackey, she started writing science fiction and fantasy books back in the 80s. Her husband is Larry Niven, who's written Star Trek and all kinds of other amazing science fiction and fantasy as well. She's written over 135 books over that period of time, and I'm a huge fan. I've read most of her books. So this fangirl moment was just amazing to me, but here's what happened. We're having the interview, and afterwards she sat and chatted with me for 45 minutes. Very timidly, I said to her, you know, I've been considering writing a book. And she leaned, we were doing it on Zoom. She leaned up into the camera like this and she said, so put your butt in the chair and write. So I did. I started writing. I got involved in the Nanowrimo program, which I'll tell you about in a minute. And I had already written about 28,000 words. I wrote over another 50,000 words in that period of time and realized I had half a book, and finished the book before the first of the year. Rough draft of the book. Okay. Now, there was a lot more to it than that, but that's where it all came from. That's how I started. It's going to be different for you. It just is. Everybody's journey is different, but that's how it started for me. It's a long story, but it all comes down to the fact that I have stories to tell. And there was somebody who took the time and the interest to make me feel like I could. All right. Hopefully that's what we'll get to do in our little talk today.
So, Bonnie, when you started writing, were you still working full time? What was your pattern, your method for getting your writing done?
Actually, in this particular case, I live in a multi-generational household. I always have trouble saying that word. And so I have grandkids living in the house with me, and another whole family. Right now, actually, there's 3 families in a very large house that we live in. So it was a lot like when I had kids growing up, but I had decided I was done with marketing and all that kind of stuff. Done with marketing and all that kind of stuff, at least for clients. I didn't want to do clients anymore. And I was in a place where I didn't really have to make a living, right? And so I decided to stop all of that after this little nudge from Ms. Lackey. I decided I was just going to go ahead and go for it. Now, not everybody can do that, but I still had to work around everybody else's schedules and everything, because let's face it, you cannot write in the midst of chaos. You have to find those quiet spots and do the things. So for those of you who have families or who are living with the family, for instance, let's say that you're a young person still in high school or in college and you're living with your family, and that gets to be a problem, recognize you gotta wanna, okay? You've got to decide that you want to do it enough to make the time to do it, because just wanting to do it isn't enough. I wanted to and wanted to and wanted to all my life. I wrote lots of things, but never the novel, you know? And so now here I am, and I made time, and I had to learn a lot about what to do with that time. It's one thing to say, okay, I'm going to write from this time to this time. All right. And tell your family, okay, I'm going to need quiet from this time to this time. And whether that's in the middle of the night or whatever it is that you do. It's another thing to take that decision and put it into practice on a regular daily basis. And I found that that wasn't as easy as it sounded like it was going to be. I already knew what the story was going to be. It had to be about that dream. I had to just figure out exactly how that dream could be a story and not involve me, because I didn't want to be the main character in my story. But I recognize that, first of all, there's certain times of the day when my brain works best. Okay, and that's different for each of us. I figured out that there were certain techniques that I needed to use. I'll give you an example of one of them. When I write, as I'm writing along in the story, I get to a certain point where I know that it's probably about time to quit. I never quit when I've run out of ideas. I always quit before I've run out of ideas, where I already know what happens next. Okay, that makes a difference. The whole writer's block thing, there are a lot of things you can do to prevent it. And it's kind of maybe a little bit a unicorn, because it's a thing that we've kind of gotten into our head that everybody gets a writer's block. Well, it's not writer's block, it's writer's distraction. Okay, you get distracted by not being able to find just the right word. Well, take that word and stick it in parentheses explaining what you think it means, and move on and go back later and find the right word. if you start every session already knowing what you're going to write when you sit down, there's no issue with writer's block. Don't edit while you write, ever. Always get the story out. I go back every 10 chapters and do 10 chapters at a time of editing. And there's some tools that I use, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but I don't edit and write. There's two completely different sides of your brain that's used for those tasks. And you want that beautiful, creative, amazing, I'm engaged in the story, I'm engaged with my characters feeling. You don't want to go, oh, should I put the Oxford comma in there? Sorry. That nothing will shut off the creative flow faster than getting engaged in that kind of activity. If you must, alternate every other day. If you really feel like, I can't wait 10 chapters to do this editing, fine. Let it sit for 24 hours, go back, edit it, but don't write and edit in the same session. It's just not helpful.
You write longhand or on a?
I'm a typewriter person. Literally, I learned on a big cast iron Royal typewriter back in the day when there were no computers. I was not a computer geek. I was a library geek, okay? But I had got my first computer in 1985. I already knew how to type, and that became a love affair. And then when the internet came around, in 1996, I got connected with the internet. I put my first website up back then, and boom, my creative flow was happening, and I got excited and good things happened. But no, I type. Now I have friends, and they're strictly in longhand. They just sit there with their yellow tablet and they write, or their steno pad and they write. Do you know what? Do what works for you, okay? Because you and I are different beings, right?
Do you follow some of the conventions, like spaced to, double spaced so there's enough room to write in?
I do the double space after a period. I can't help myself. It was trained into me. If my editor or the formatter decides to take that space out, I have no issue with it. But for me, the double space happens, and I'm not going to try and retrain myself. So yeah, and I think that it's really important to recognize a few other conventions that authors use in their writing. For instance, there's basically two camps. There are the outliners, people who make detailed outlines of their books before they ever write a single page. This can be helpful for writer's block. Just saying, it can. Not always, because I know some outliners who have severe issues with writer's block, but it can for certain kinds of people. I, on the other hand, am what's known as a pantser. I write by the seat of my pants. I know where the story is heading, but I have a little bit of a wrinkle. I write the last chapter first. It gives me something to shoot for. I know how this is all supposed to end. I know who my characters are. I get very engaged with my characters. As a matter of fact, they visit me in the middle of the night in inconvenient times. But that being said, you have to choose the thing that works best for you. And so people who go, oh, well, she's a pantser, or oh, she's an outliner, or he, whatever. The point is, they have their own styles. And the thing that works for them is the thing that they need to do in order to get the story out there. It really comes down to, do you have a story to tell? Do you know who is in the story? One of the things that I have done with some of the writers that I mentor is when they're saying, I'm blocked. Okay, so stop writing your story for just a minute. I want you to pick one of your characters, and I want you to do a very detailed description of who they are, where they came from, and what is the biggest pain in their life. And do you know what? It's really funny how getting engaged with the characters all of a sudden makes you automatically weave them back into the story, and things start to happen. So it's really about knowing why a character would do a specific thing, or what they would do in a specific situation, and then put them in the situations they need to go through in order to get to your end point. Okay. And if it's too easy, if the path is too easy, nobody's going to want to read it. There needs to be bumps in the road. There needs to be detour signs. You know, you need to have places where the character is at their wits' end. How could this possibly have happened to me, right? Or whatever. Before they can be strong and courageous and win the day, have to go through some stuff, because we all do. And that's the only way that people will suspend their belief. I write science fiction that reads like fantasy. That's my genre, which is a little weird. I get it, but I take science and explain what we think of as fantasy, the myths and so forth that we're so familiar with. That's kind of where my whole Dimensional Alliance thing comes from. But I know my overall world. I know how these characters need to grow over the pace of the story. And so I plot in my mind that story arc over, this is where they started, this is where they're going to end, and oh my goodness, this is that horrible thing that happens in the middle that they have to resolve. Think of it like acts in a play. And I have found that that is the one thing that helps me keep going. Now, I published the first book 2 weeks before my 64th birthday, and I just turned 67, and the fourth book is in the works. So as you can tell, I've published a lot of books fairly quickly compared to maybe some other authors that you might know out there. And my books are fairly long. They run from 350 to 400 pages. So they're not, you know, short books, but it's because once I get into it, I'm there, I'm in there, I'm engaged. And do I have interruptions? Of course I do. Do I have days when I don't feel like writing? I have a number of health issues that, especially as an older person, that often prevent me from getting my writing in for that day or stop me in the middle of it. So you're going to find that, like your characters, it's not always going to go smoothly. You're not always going to sit down and write 5,000 words a day. That's a little unrealistic for most of us, or anything like that. But get your story out. If it takes you 2 years to write your story, take 2 years to write your story. Don't judge your work by somebody else's work. It's unnecessary. And you look at some of the most amazing authors out there, and some of them write very, very quickly, and some of them take years to write a book, and it's worth the wait.
Now, this feels like a good time to sort of shift a little bit from the writing technique and talk a bit more about self-publishing. Did you know right away that self-publishing was what you wanted to do?
I figured that out very early on. I had joined a number of writer support groups, and I was paying great attention to the process that was necessary to publish your book by a traditional publishing, because that's kind of where I was raised up. I actually took something called the Famous Writers course back in the days when those kind of courses were actually male courses. And one of the things that they hammered on was writing query letters and all the things that are necessary in order to get yourself an agent and get that book published. And back then, agents weren't as much of a thing as they have become recently. But either way, that was how I came up in terms of someday I'm going to write a book. Then I'm sitting here at age 63 going, so it could take up to 6 years before somebody publishes my book. I don't know if I've got that much longer to wait. So what do I do? Well, the other thing about writers groups is you have people from both camps engaged in these groups. And so I started educating myself about self-publishing. And I joined an amazing online group called the Alliance for Independent Authors. And oh, by the way, I've got a little cheat sheet. By the way, for those of you who are taking notes and all that, there's a resources for writers document that I have forwarded to Kathy, and she will see to it that anybody who wants one gets one. And it's got links to all these different things that I'm mentioning in our talk today. So don't panic if you didn't get all of this down. At any rate, so the Alliance for of Independent Authors, and I began to learn about the publishing industry. Oh my goodness, I thought writing a book was interesting. The whole publishing thing was crazy. And so with my very first book, I went the easy route. I published with Amazon. Amazon's quick, easy, it's free, and boom, your book's up. As long as it doesn't cross any of their guidelines, you can publish just about anything. For example, I have a 6-year-old friend who published her first book at age 5. And the name of the book was The Dirty Day, Why Toilet Water Should Stay in the Toilet. It was 20 whole pages. Her dad had illustrated it with stick figures. It was flat, adorable. I took great joy in walking up to her and solemnly shaking her hand and saying, "I bought your book online. It's amazing. I just wanted to shake your hand." It was great.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So anybody seriously can publish a book, and that's part of the problem. That's why self-published authors are often looked down upon until somebody knows really if their work's worth it, because people are tired of getting horribly disappointed by the Kindle books that they get. All right. So whether it's a 99-cent center or not, it's like you invest the time to get into the book and go, oh, this is horrible. And you don't read it. And the 99 cents may be down the drain, but your time's even more valuable. So as I'm going along, I get to the third book, and I realize that there are a lot of drawbacks to publishing with Amazon. One is that they become the boss of you. They decide what to charge for your book. They decide where it can go. And here was the big drawback. I couldn't get it into libraries. Libraries don't buy from Amazon, generally speaking, except for maybe some really small, obscure libraries that I haven't run into yet. So it's like the one thing I wanted, the first thing I did when I got my first real copies of my book in my hand with my name on it and everything, was to run over to my local library and donate the copy to my librarian. I was so proud of myself. She was so gracious. And she said, oh, she says, I'll take a look at it and see if we can add it to our collection, which she did. And I found that I had a hard time with one issue. I wanted to get my picture taken with my book on the shelf in the library, but every time I went, it was already checked out, which is what my friend would call a quality problem to have. So this was a good thing. So I couldn't get it into libraries, and there were a lot of ebook formats that people couldn't get the book in. And I said, this isn't working for me. What do I do? So what I found out was that I was under a fairly serious binding contract with Amazon. And so there was only one thing to do. I did a second edition of my book. I reformatted it completely. I did some edits because there's always something that's missed in the edit process, and redid the acknowledgments and some of the other things so that it looked like a completely different book. I changed some things on the cover, which, by the way, I have an amazing cover artist who does that for me. I mean, so what I did was I went through a company called Ingram Spark. They are also a print-on-demand publisher, and they are publishing all of my physical books. Well, the nice thing about Ingram Spark is they're not just a publisher, but a distributor of books, and they distribute to retailers and wholesalers all over the world. And so now libraries can get a hold of my books. Yay! And then I went through Draft to Digital, another distribution company, and published my ebooks. And now my ebooks are on Overdrive and Tolino and several other library lending ebook programs that are out there. This is exciting to me, okay? It makes me so happy. And when I get my little statement from Draft to Digital and it shows that people are checking out my books in libraries, I'm like, yes, 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 yes. Because for me, that's the thing. The other thing is I can now get my books into local bookstores. And so I've created a relationship with my local bookstore. I didn't know any of this when I started out, okay? I learned it through other people who know what they're doing. There is a link that I forgot to put on the document that I'll just mention right now called Wide for the Win. It's on Facebook, Wide for the Win. And they are all about publishing wide, which all that means is you didn't just only publish in Amazon. You're publishing through a distributor who will distribute it everywhere. So that's another good one, and you can just type that in to your search bar and find it. At any rate, so that was my publishing journey. But in the meantime, talk about your potholes. Every scammer that's out there has some kind of a publishing scam out there, where they will gladly take your money, tell you that they will turn your book into a bestseller, and never do a darn thing, and try and get your money back, because there's always a clause somewhere in the contract that says that in the end, the results are dependent on the quality of the book, blah, 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 blah. And so it becomes your fault that the book didn't sell. All right, please get involved in these groups where there are people who know things. And if somebody makes an offer to you that sounds too good to be true, go to them and say, have you heard about these guys? Because the scammers are out there. They recognize that publishing is a huge industry now. Millions of books are published in Amazon every year, okay? Which means that you're going to get lost. And that's the other thing that I found out is because I'm chief cook and bottle washer, I end up having to do most of my own marketing. Well, wait a minute. I talked to some of my traditionally published friends, and guess what? So do they. Because publishers don't have the time or the budgets to do more than do a quick initial splash about your book, and then you're on your own.
If you had to identify one thing, one marketing thing that you've learned that you would want people thinking about getting published, self-published to know, if I force you to narrow it down to some marketing thing that you would want everybody to be aware of, what comes to mind?
Create relationships. One of the nice things about going wide is you have full access to the names and email addresses of the people who are reading your books. And you need a newsletter. You need a fan page on Facebook where people can go and interact with you. Also, create relationships with beta readers. The nice thing about people who read your book before it comes out is, number one, it saves you a lot of money in the editing process, because the cleaner your book is when you hand it to the editor, the less they're going to charge you, okay? Plus, they become your fans, and they talk about your books to their friends. Creating relationships where they get to connect with you, where they feel, I know a celebrity. Okay, so I can't tell, oh, I gotta relate this one little thing. I'm in one of our local bookstores. I'll even name them, the Adventures Underground Bookstore in our town. And I'm there to buy Christmas presents for my grandkids because it's a great bookstore with lots of other things besides books. And I'm walking down the aisle, actually rolling down the aisle because I'm in a power chair, but I'm rolling down the aisle, and all of a sudden this lady comes up to me and says, I just bought your books for my friend. Will you sign them for me? she knew who I was. Do you know how cool that is?
Pretty cool.
I didn't start writing books to become a celebrity, but there's something incredibly satisfying about people knowing who you are and coming up to you and saying, my daughter is reading your books and she loves it. My son can't get enough. On and on and on. We've been reading your book together as a family, and I just love the fact that you're family friendly and I don't have to worry about, you know, bombs in the middle and stuff, and on and on and on. Those kinds of things are so incredibly enjoyable, but it starts with making relationships. Don't make it a secret that you're writing a book. It'll hold your toes to the fire because people will keep asking you, how's it coming? And your beta readers will keep you moving because if they like your book, they want you to write the next one and the next one and the next one. Sometimes it gets a little annoying actually. But at any rate, the point is you have to kind of come out of your shell. Now, this is hard for most writers because one of the reasons we write is we're a bit, let's face it, shy. That's not me, as you can tell. But that being said, if you can come out of your shell to talk with people who like you, you can come out of your shell to talk to people about your books, and you can welcome them into the world you're building. It's an amazing experience. There are a lot of other things in marketing that you need to do. And I would love to, at some point, just do an author talk at some point about marketing your book. That would be so much fun for me. But in the meantime, put your butt in the chair and write, because you can't market something you don't have yet.
Bonnie, I wonder if now that you're a published author, has that changed the way you do your writing at all?
Not really. I would say I do have a tendency now to keep my readers in mind a little more as my story progresses. But as far as the actual process, it really hasn't changed much. I do get a lot more support from my family now that I've got a couple of published books under my belt. As you can tell, it's very quiet in here right now. Well, they're all like, oh, Grandma's doing an author talk. We've got to be quiet. So this is really cool. And I will make sure that they get cookies or something as a reward later. But at any rate, no, I would say that probably, if anything, it's just made me a lot more aware of how the things that I write affect the people who read the things that I write. And I don't mean that in an idea of writing so that I can be more popular or adjusting my writing to suit a certain trend or this, that, and the other. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about I'm a lot more sensitive to the idea that when I do something with my writing, that it could make an impression on somebody that could potentially be life-changing, whether that's for a few minutes of their life or whether that's for a longer term. And I have always, I will make this one confession. From the beginning, I always knew that I would never write a book that I couldn't read aloud to my grandchildren without embarrassment. It's one of the things I do. Now, no judgment on anybody who has a different writing style or different goals with their writing, but that's just definitely a case for me. So my science fiction / fantasy is what some people would call clean, okay? And there are a lot of opinions about that, and I am a firm believer in the freedom of speech, okay? But when it comes down to it, this is me. This is my story, the story I get to tell, and I tell it in a way that for me, I want, when somebody finishes one of my books, I want them to feel uplifted. I want them to feel like, wow, that character did this really cool thing. I'd like to do that. Or that character overcame this obstacle. I can do that. Those are the kinds of things that I hope comes out of my writing. A lot like authors like, for instance, C.S. Lewis, okay? I think that it's inevitable that your belief systems come out in your writing. It's just one of those things. We all have different opinions. We all have different ways of thinking and all of that. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that it's not my job to judge somebody else's writing. It is my job to judge my writing by my standards.
Is there anything, before we get to the question and answer session, is there anything else that, you know, can you tell us a little bit more about the books themselves, about the fourth book that's in the work?
Oh, I would, thank you. I would love to do that. I don't do these things to toot my own horn, but I do love talking about my books. So basically, that dream I told you about, the books are about a young woman. She's a ghostwriter in Los Angeles, and she inherits from an aunt she's only met twice in her life a house, a cat, and a key. And none of them are what they seem to be. The house has a room in it that couldn't possibly exist. The cat is not a cat, and the key doesn't fit anything that she can discover. She's looked and looked and looked through her entire house and can't find anything that that key goes to. This is the beginning of an adventure that takes place in the multiverse. Through dimensional travel, there are dragons and there are elves and dwarves, but not in a fantasy way. There is no magic, unless you count the magic that, well, one of the things I like to say is that magic is science we don't understand yet. Okay, so there's no, what is the word, wand waving in these books, but I do have a feeling that most of my readers think they are somewhat magical. The strong female character in there, the idea that people should have the right to choose their paths, the idea that we shouldn't judge another culture by our own cultural identity. There are so many concepts in here, but the story itself is about this young woman. Now, there's 3 books in the trilogy, and she goes through these amazing adventures all over the multiverse. And then she comes home and she reads the journals of the aunt who she got the house from and that started this whole mess in her life. And that's the second set of books. So the 4th book that I'm writing right now is about Lizzie, who is the aunt. Jenny is our main character, and Lizzie is the aunt who started the whole thing. And so now we have this new trilogy that's happening about Lizzie and how she came to the point to where she handed this legacy over to Jenny. There are probably going to be about, well, over a dozen books in this series total. But for right now, we have the trilogy and we have the new trilogy that will be published in November. And this will be available on all the ebook, anywhere that you can buy an ebook, whether you buy it at Nook or Amazon or Barnes and Noble, all of them have them available. You can ask your local bookstores to buy them. If you go to the website, which is Dimensional Alliance Headquarters.com, you can find out more about the books, where you can buy them. Also, for librarians and bookshop owners, there is a special page with detail pages about each of the books, about their length, their ISBN, all that kind of cool and lovely detaily stuff. So I don't think I'll stop writing anytime soon. My daughter-in-law told me I wasn't allowed to die until I finished the series, so I figure I'll live forever.
Very good. I also wanted to give you a quick moment to say something about Nanowrimo.
Oh, Nanowrimo. I knew there was something I was missing. So Nanowrimo is an organization, nonprofit organization, that encourages writers to write. And what I mean by that is this. They do this really cool challenge 2 or 3 times a year where they give you a set number of words to write. There's actually a challenge where you get to set the number of words you're going to write in a month. The one in November is 50,000 words, okay? And they have an app that helps you track the number of words that you're writing every day. It tells you how often you're writing, and how many breaks you're taking, and a number of details about your writing style. What is the best time for you to write? When do you normally write the longest? All that. There's all these cool little details. And so it's free to join. It doesn't cost anything. And then they have a group on Facebook called Nanowrimo. And once you have signed up as a Nanowrimo person on their website, you can then go into their group and join it. It's a private group, and it's all authors supporting one another, cheering each other on. I only did 500 words today. It's okay. You're going to do 1,200 words tomorrow. They are so supportive, and there are beginning writers as early as junior high school, and there are writers who have published many books, all interacting together. It's amazing. It's fun. A lot of teachers bring their entire class, their writing class, into NaNoWriMo and do the challenge as a class. That would be really interesting to see the kind of grades that they get on that. But it's great. And the nice thing about it is you start a project, and in 50,000 words, you can do a short novella. If you do that, like I did, and realize, hey, I got half a book here, you just keep writing, because here's what it teaches you. It teaches you to be consistent and persistent in your writing, to set goals, and to be in integrity with yourself to achieve those goals. So it's a great program. I highly recommend it. There are some other Facebook groups within that document that I sent out that are extremely helpful for authors. And also there are some writers' tools that I use that are listed there that you can go and check out if you need some special tools like for editing, that sort of thing, as well as publishing information on that handout.
Super. And let me just mention, Bonnie, that Gisela has been putting the links that you've mentioned. She also put a link into the document that you wrote. So
perfect.
And I'm gonna, I think we've had a question or two in the chat. So let's start there. Gisela, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so we had a question from Alberto asking, how do you get beta readers?
How do I get beta readers? That's a really good question. So start with people who like you a lot. You probably know some people who like to read. And depending on what your genre is, one of the approaches I use when I want to talk to somebody about my books is, do you like to read for fun? Find people who like to read for fun. But some of these groups that I put in that document that I told you about like to be beta readers for each other. So you can get beta readers of people who are also writing and have a good interest in cheering you on and not being hypercritical. What I did was I started a group on Facebook, a private group where nobody can get in except for my beta readers. And I invited people that I knew liked to read and might have the time, because there is an investment in time, to do that. And then I offered to them that when the book was published that they would get a free ebook, or that if they purchased the paperback that I would sign it for them. So, you want to give them a reason to want to do it, but that's the easiest way that I found.
Awesome. We have another question from Eden this time. Are any aspects of your characters based off people you know in real life?
Absolutely. Except for I mix them up. I scramble them. You've seen those little kids puzzles where you got these 3 flaps and one's a head and one's arms and one's feet, and you can turn them into all kinds of things. Well, that's what I do with my characters. There's a particular scene in one of my books that's literally about a cat we used to own and a dog we used to know. And it's a scene that actually my children, when they read the book, said, I can't believe you put that in there. That's so cool. But most of my characters are a combination of people that I have met in my life. We write what we know. I mean, that's kind of a cliche, write what you know, right? The advice people give to authors, but you can't help it. You have to write what you know. Even the things you make up in your head are based on something you know, right? Something you've seen, something you've heard. So yes, I do take little bits and pieces. And people who know me well, every once in a while will go, was that from this? But generally speaking, I don't have to put one of those little disclaimers at the beginning that say any resemblance to people, you know, in the popular eye or whatnot is just a coincidence, because I really don't do that.
That was a wonderful answer. We have a question from Gloria. How expensive is it to self-publish?
It depends on a lot of things. First of all, you know, they say don't judge a book by its cover. Well, they do. Everybody does. Okay. So you need a good cover. And that, generally speaking, if you're going to do that, needs to be done by somebody who actually has some kind of art talent. I could draw really great stick figures. Okay. Now, there are tools out there like Canva and Photoshop and blah, blah, blah. And if you're really good with that and you feel like you've got the artistic thing that allow you to do that objectively, yeah, you can. But generally speaking, you need to pay somebody to do your cover. And there's a lot of ways to do that. You can give them some up front and then split some of your royalties with them down the road, or you can pay them straight out. There are some people who, after being beta readers who happen to have artistic talent, might say, I'll do your cover for free. Be careful about that. Because, you know, people don't like to hurt other people's feelings, blah, blah, blah. And you might end up with a cover that you really don't want. The other thing is editor, a professional editor. You can proofread, and there's a great tool in the little packet that I sent to you that is called Pro Writing Aid. It's great for doing first, second, third, and however many edits you OCD-ishness need to do on your books before you hand it to an editor. My son says you're just like the woman who cleans her house before she lets the housekeeper come in. And that's true, but it costs you a lot less the less errors there are, the less time your editor has to put into your book. Okay, so I edit every 10 chapters, then I do a complete edit. Just what I do is I let Word actually read the book to me. It's a robot voice, but it's perfect because I actually hear and see at the same time, so I don't actually accidentally skip over a big blooper, because sometimes you do that because you've already written it and in your head, you know how you think it should sound. And then also Google, if you're using Google Docs to write, which is a perfectly acceptable tool these days, you can have it read it to you. I suggest that you do a complete edit that way. Then I use the edit function in Word. Then I turn it over to Pro Writing Aid. I figure by then the errors will be way less. Once I've gone over it thoroughly twice with Pro Writing Aid, then I hand it to my editor. So, so those are two of the things. The third thing is an ISBN. You should own your own ISBN numbers. That is proof that you wrote this book. It's not a copyright, okay? You know, FYI, it's not a copyright, but it's strong proof that you wrote this book and that it's a real book and not just something, okay? And so that costs a little bit. And then the cost to set it up with a distributor. Now, with Amazon, as I said, you can do that for free. It doesn't cost you anything. Ingram Spark does charge. However, if you are a member of the Alliance of Self-Published Authors, you can get that for free. So it's definitely worth the membership, the cost of membership for that. So all in all, I would say taking the cover and everything into consideration, you're talking about maybe somewhere between $800 to $2,000. And it's going to vary from book to book. How long is your book? There's a lot of things that come into play with these numbers. But like I said, I got started for $0 because the person who did my book cover made an agreement to split royalties. But I stumbled into that. That doesn't happen all the time. So just to be aware, there is going to be an investment. But guess what? Even if you go through a traditional publisher, you will invest money, lots of it, in getting it set up, because you still have to do all this stuff. You still need to edit it before you ever send it to an agent, blah, blah, blah. So just be aware that sometimes paying a little extra saves you a lot in the end.
That was some great piece of advice, Bonnie.
Cool. In the meantime, if they have questions in that thing, there, my email is there. Feel free, any of you, to friend me on Facebook. I love talking to other authors and whatnot. And I have a number of authors that I've been mentoring along in their process and stuff. And I like surrounding myself with creative people. So thank you so much for inviting me today.
Thank you. That's such a generous offer. We have one last question from Gloria. How hard is it to get feedback from family members, and do you recommend doing this?
It depends on the family member, my dear. So we all have members of our family who either A, don't think much of us, or think a great deal of their own opinions. And that's kind of normal family situation. But you need someone who's not afraid to hurt your feelings. And you need to develop a thick skin, because there will be things that people do not agree with in your writing style. There's going to be corrections they're going to find that are going to be big glaring errors that are going to make you feel incredibly stupid. And there are going to be times when they're going to be wrong. You're the writer, you're the author. Some things you put in there for a reason that they may not understand. It might be that that's your style, and that might not be the style that they normally read. But if you're going to ask the opinion of family members, make sure that they're people who actually read your genre. If you're writing historical novels, don't ask a fantasy freak or a science fiction nerd. You know, being one of them, okay, I can say those words, all right? Ask someone who actually reads your genre. If you're writing romances, don't write somebody who wants to read Westerns or combat novels. They're not going to enjoy it. And that's one other little tiny bit of advice. You will be criticized for your novel when you publish it. Just expect it. Recognize you will get bad reviews. You will get one-star reviews. You'll get one-star reviews that don't have any comments. They don't even tell you why they didn't like it. They just put up a one-star review. But here's what you should know. Your book is not for everybody. Your book is for the readers who like the kinds of things you write. It's that simple. So if J.K. Rowling, Hemingway, and Mark Twain can get seriously negative reviews about their books, dear, it just shows you're an author. Because guess what? The people who aren't getting any reviews aren't writing anything. Just saying.
There we go. Bonnie, you've been very generous with your information. I've really enjoyed this a lot. Is there any final wrap-up thing that you'd like to say before we end today?
Yes. Simple. Don't give up on your dream.
Very good. Okay. Thank you very much. This has been a real pleasure.
It's been a joy.
All right. Very good.